Could Freddy Peralta be a league winner? Let's find out. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Tuesday, August 8th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White. Today on the show, some big waiver wire pitching performances. Cole Ragans looks pretty good. How to value Cody Bellinger in keeper and dynasty leagues. I think this is a confounding conversation, and I think it's kind of an interesting one here, Scott. So we'll talk about that. And of course, we'll talk about Freddy Peralta's recent run of success. Before we get started, please like this video and subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. And if you're listening on the audio side, download, follow, and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. Shout out to you, Scotty. You and Chris, you held it down last night. I did watch some of the podcasts when I got home, and I thought it went really well. What'd you think?
And I mean, more credit to Chris than to me. He put together the show notes, which is always, it's an avalanche of notes coming out of the weekend.
Yes.
And steered us through the show. So I think he earned the right to sit tonight out after doing that. And glad to have you back.
Yeah. I got to watch out, though, man. Towers, he did well. Might steal my job. I got to keep my head on a swivel. Watch the old Towers. Anyway, I thought my voice sounded fine all day, and now I'm realizing, 2 days of Metallica in one weekend, probably not the best idea either. But you live and you learn. Let's jump in.
I don't believe what I just saw.
All right, Scott, you are up. Player of the night.
I'm going to go with Cole Ragans, who turned in his second impressive start since rejoining the Royals rotation. Remember, when he came over to the Rangers, I think he got a start right away, then was sent to the minors. Didn't come back until after the trade deadline when Ryan Yarbrough was sent to the Dodgers. Cole Ragans has a rotation spot of his own now, and I didn't get a chance to talk about him after his first start back in the rotation following the Yarbrough trade, where he threw 6 shutout innings against the Mets, struck out 8. I was not on the show the day that happened, so I didn't get a chance to comment on it. But I did include him among my sleeper pitchers for this week. It was with some amount of hand-wringing and, an acknowledgement that part of the reason I'm including him is he's so widely available. But he came through. He came through with even better numbers than in that start against the Mets. Cole Ragans struck out 11 in 6 2/3 at Boston, allowing just 1 earned run. And I think there's definitely something to see here, given how good he's looked in his return to the rotation. So I'll kind of go through the whole backstory here with Cole Ragans. Was a pretty highly regarded prospect, had health issues in the minors that caused his stock to tumble. Came to spring training this year throwing much, much harder than a year ago. In fact, his average fastball velocity this year, 4 miles per hour harder than last year. And so that put him on my radar right then this spring. Wow, this guy's throwing hard. I was hoping he could find a way into the Rangers rotation. It didn't happen. He pitched out of the bullpen. The performance was kind of meh, and has spent some time in the minors this year too. And the performance there is kind of meh. But when he rejoined the Royals rotation for that turn against the Mets, following the Ryan Yarbrough trade, striking out 8, Cole Ragans' arsenal was a little different. He actually confused StatCast by throwing 2 different velocities of cutter, which now in the second start has been reclassified. The slower one's been reclassified as a slider. And that seems to have brought it all together for him, because I said his performance in the majors prior to these 2 starts had been kind of meh. It's because he was struggling against left-handers, actually. He throws left-handed, but those were the ones that were beating him, left-handed hitters. He thought the cutter was an ineffective weapon against him. It was too close in the velocity to the fastball, so he introduced the slider in his last start. Again, continued to throw it in this start, and got 4 whiffs on the 12 that he threw. Pretty good. And yeah, everything played up nicely. 18 swinging strikes, 11 strikeouts, like I said. I think it's time to get Cole Ragans on all of our radar. Pick him up regardless of the fact that you missed out on the 2-star week. and hope he can pitch well enough to maybe secure some wins even with the Royals.
And he is widely available. 25% rostered is Cole Ragans on CBS. He is a SPARP as well. So if you're playing a points league, he has that RP eligibility, a little bit of a cheat code. The one thing we have to watch for, it wasn't an issue in this start, the walks. Walks have been a big issue for him in the minors. But outside of that, I mean, like you said, the velocity, the arsenal change here, and it's a good park to pitch in Kansas City as well. So lots to like there with Cole Ragans. Lots to like with a few other pitchers here who also pitched on Monday. Scott, Gavin Williams, amazing start up against the Toronto Blue Jays. 7 shutout innings, 1 hit, 1 walk, 12 strikeouts with 17 swinging strikes, 12 of those coming on his fastball. Velocity was up basically across the board here, specifically on his 2 breaking pitches. We had some other pitchers pitch well too. I don't know that they're in the same stratosphere. It's Brandon Williamson and Patrick Sandoval. I think it's kind of a 2-horse race here, Scott. Who would you rather have between Gavin Williams and Cole Ragans?
I'm going to say Gavin Williams because obviously there's much more of a prospect pedigree there. And look, what he did against the Blue Jays was awfully impressive. And when you consider the improved velocity on the slider and curveball, which, by the way, was also true in his previous start. In fact, he was throwing those even harder. So they're up about 1.5 miles in this start. Gavin Williams was throwing them like to 2 to 3 miles per hour harder in his previous start. Didn't get great results against the Astros. So I don't even know if we had a show that day, but it was one of those situations. Well, since he didn't get good results, is it even worth pointing out that he was throwing him harder? But then he bounces right back with the best start of his career so far against the Blue Jays. And okay. Yeah, maybe there's something to this, throwing those breaking balls harder, throwing them more too, which is something I wanted to see him do. Seems like a lot of pitchers lean too much on their fastball early on. We've seen that with Brandon Pfaadt too. And it takes them a while to come around to throwing their off-speed pitches more, when often that's the key for them really beginning to shine. And hopefully we're seeing that with Gavin Williams because the upside is enormous. I can't take credit for him in this 2-star week. I did not call him a sleeper pitcher. In fact, I said he wasn't worth starting just because the performance had been so uninspiring so far. But here's a reminder of his upside. Awesome start against the Blue Jays. Hopefully we see more of it going forward as he continues to lean into those breaking balls more.
All right, so Gavin Williams over Cole Ragans. Scott, what if I put Chase Silseth in that mix? I know you and Chris talked extensively about him yesterday as well. Where would Silseth rank among those 3?
Yeah, obviously there's a lot to like about Silseth, as we talked about yesterday. He's made some changes to his slider. He started to see some success with the split finger fastball in his most recent start. I think he drops to 3rd on this list, which I know, as much as we talked him up yesterday, that's kind of like, wow, recency bias much. But Silseth is in a 6-man rotation. So, the likelihood of him getting a 2-start week at any point moving forward is very small. And I think of the 3, we've seen the Angels be more careful with his workload than these other 2. Gavin Williams, I don't think has any major workload concerns to close out the season, even given his young age. They've been so careful with him up to this point. So I'm going to put Silseth 3rd of that group.
Okay, I quickly ran through the names, Brandon Williamson and Patrick Sandoval as well. For Williamson, last 7 starts since the beginning of July, 3.19 ERA, a 104 whip, right around a strikeout per inning for him. His velocity was up, around 1.5 miles on a couple of different pitches here on Monday. And Patrick Sandoval, 8 strikeouts over 6 2/3 innings. He threw his changeup more. He made it his most used pitch in this outing, and that's something we've long wondered. Why doesn't Patrick Sandoval throw his changeup more? It's a fantastic changeup. But over his last 5 starts, a 2.48 ERA and a 107 whip. It's got any enthusiasm for those 2, Williamson and Patrick Sandoval?
Look, it was great to see from Brandon Williamson today. Reds left-hander, if you're unfamiliar. We haven't had much reason to talk about him since he got called up. It's great to see 17 swinging strikes on 89 pitches, 9 strikeouts. 3 different pitches, the cutter, the fastball, and the changeup all got 5 swinging strikes or more. So I just got to see where it goes from here, because it's a totally isolated incident from a pitcher who we had little reason to care about prior to this. So Brandon Williamson, if we're combining all these pitchers together, he's at the very bottom of the list, number 5. Sandoval, I would put 4th. I would put him behind Silseth and ahead of Williamson, which again, Williamson and Williams are different pitchers. We're kind of talking about him in this. Gavin Williams is one guy. Brandon Williamson is another. Gavin Williamson. I'm sorry. Sorry, mixing myself up. Brandon Williams at the top of the list. Brandon Williamson at the bottom. But with Sandoval, there've just been so many walks. Even as he's had better results in preventing runs, the walks have been high. The efficiency's been low. He hasn't been pitching deep into starts. As another guy who's stuck in that 6-man rotation for the Angels. It was encouraging to see him throw his changeup more. And also the velocity on that changeup here Monday was down 2 miles per hour, which was interesting. It didn't seem to hinder its effectiveness at all. Of his 16 swinging strikes, 12 came on that changeup. So maybe there was some kind of conscious change there happening for Patrick Sandoval that can help him reach the levels we've seen him reach before. But sort of like with Williamson, I have to see more before I'm going to make too much of it.
All right. Well, let's slide over to another pitcher who I wanted to highlight up top here, Freddy Peralta, with an amazing start here up against the Colorado Rockies. I get it. The Rockies were on the road here. The start came in Milwaukee. So obviously it's a fantastic matchup, but tied a career high with 13 strikeouts, 31 swinging strikes on 94 pitches for Freddy Peralta in this start. 7 innings, 1 run, those 13 strikeouts, 0 walks. Walks and home runs have been a big problem for Freddy Peralta this year. But yeah, he spread out those swinging strikes across all of his pitches. 17 of them came on the fastball. His velocity was up, slider up 1.8 miles per hour, the curve up 2.1 miles per hour in this start. And over his last 5 starts here in the second half for Freddy Peralta, it's a 3.0 ERA on the nose, a .83 whip, 44 strikeouts over 30 innings pitched. And we've seen big upside from Freddy Peralta in the past, Scott. So I wanted to pose the question, do you think that Freddy Peralta could turn into a league winner here in the second half?
It's possible. Obviously, 2 of his last 3 starts have been amazing. 31 whiffs in one, 24 whiffs in the other, 13 strikeouts in each, with a decent start in between the 2. So it's not like it's been this Jekyll and Hyde stuff we've seen from so much of the pitcher crop this year. I mean, you could classify Peralta's entire season as Jekyll and Hyde, I guess, which is why his overall numbers are so pedestrian. But recently here, for at least last 3 starts, he has looked like somebody you should trust in your lineup every week again. And I did have him as a must-start 2-start pitcher for this week. I felt a little weird doing it based on the way his season has gone, but so far so good. I'm reluctant to say he's totally fine and we can put all our trust in Freddy Peralta going forward, just because that's not been a wise thing to say about many pitchers this season. I mean, when you see what happened to Spencer Strider against the Pirates today, it's just another reminder of sort of the random number generator effect that we've seen throughout the pitcher pool this year. And Peralta's been as susceptible to it as anybody. We know he has big upside from one start to the next. We know he has a ton of strikeout potential, but can he, like, if I say right now, yes, Freddy Peralta's back, look at how many strikeouts he has over his last 3 starts. What do I say when he allows 8 earned runs in his next start? Like, I'm not confident that won't happen. Like, how can I be confident that won't happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you, Scott. And another name that I guess we could talk about a little bit later on, Seth Lugo, someone I've been, pumping up, talking how under rostered he is and how reliable he's been. And he goes out and he gets destroyed by the Dodgers. Obviously, it's a tough matchup, but so just another pitcher there that had been pretty reliable and does not come through. look, I think if Freddy Peralta could keep those walks and home runs down, it sounds so easy, right? Yeah, just do this. But it's clearly not. And I do think that there is a chance for big upside here in the second half of the season for Freddy Peralta, a team that, they're in the thick of it in the NL Central. And I think, he could be a big part of that. It's just a matter of consistency now for one Freddy Peralta. I did want to give a shout out to Pete Alonso, who kind of looks like he's back here in the second half. 3 for 4 with a double dong, 6 RBI on Monday. He is back up to 33 home runs. And so far in the second half, 280 batting average with 7 home runs and a 954 OPS. Sounds a lot like Pete Alonso. So good to see that after a cold stretch there coming back from the wrist injury. We spoke about the waiver wire pitchers a little bit earlier on. Let's talk about some waiver wire hitters. Scott, I've got 2 names here, 2 outfielders. Sal Frelick, who went 2 for 3 with a walk and his 3rd home run. He's batting 273 with a 980 OPS early on here. He was one of your sleeper hitters for this week. And James Outman, who had 4 hits. He went 4 for 4 with a walk and 2 runs scored, has performed much better in the second half. The plate discipline has been a lot better. They're exactly at 65% rostered. Who would you prefer, Frelick or James Outman?
I would definitely prefer Frelick. I think he's more integral to the Brewers lineup than Outman is to the Dodgers. Just checking to see what the playing time's been like for Outman recently. He's starting most of the time, sitting against some left-handers, it looks like. So, they seem to be putting a lot of trust in him again. But Frelick, I think, has a more durable skill set. And interestingly, as well as he's hit, you look at his expected stats on StatCast, and they're pretty awful. The guy doesn't make hard contact, but he puts the ball in the right places, and he seems to be a master of that. Looking at his minor league track record, I'm not willing to bet against it. The kind of start he's off to. I do want to see him running more because I feel like steals have to be a big part of Frelick's game. Unless he can sustain the power he's shown so far. Only 1 steal, but I suspect that the steals are going to continue for Frelick as he continues to get on base. With Outman, one word of warning beyond the possibility of him sitting against left-handers is, okay, so he's been hot since July 1st, batting 337, 4 home runs, 5 steals in 28 games. His average exit velocity during that stretch is like 85 miles per hour.
It's weird.
Yeah, and while Frelick can get away with soft contact on average, I'm not sure Outman can. So that is a bit contradictory that he's hitting so well while making such weak contact on average. I wouldn't bet on it being I wouldn't bet on it being a path to success for him.
All right. Again, that was Frelick versus Outman. I do agree with you. I would take Frelick. The fact that when he plays, it seems like so far he's sitting against lefties, but when he's in the lineup, he's batting right there in the middle of the Brewers lineup. And the plate discipline has been really good so far. 14 walks to 11 strikeouts for Sal Frelick. In that small sample, that's a 23% walk rate versus an 18% strikeout rate for Sal Frelick. Do any of these players matter for fantasy, Scott? Some hitters that I've got. Luis Campusano went 4 for 4 with a double dong and 4 RBI. He's played 20 games this season, and he's got a 319 batting average, 4 home runs, and 878 OPS. Of course, this game had a lot to do with it for Luis Campusano. Bryce Terang went 1 for 3 with his 6th home run, and since returning from the minors, he is batting 257, with 3 home runs and 4 steals, so a little bit of power and speed there for Terang. And Mitch Garver, 3 for 4 with 2 doubles and 2 RBI, hitting 284 with an 854 OPS and getting the opportunity to play more with Jonah Heim hurt. Do any of these players matter, Scott? Garver, Terang, and Campusano.
I think the catchers are more likely to matter than Terang is, especially Garver, because it sounds like Jonah Heim's injury, even if he makes it back from it this year, he might only be able to bat from I think it was the left side, they said, and if he's limited to that degree, how well is he going to perform? I don't know. I don't have a lot of hope for Jonah Heim rest of season. He needs surgery on his wrist. I think it's a torn tendon sheath in the wrist, right? And they're just trying to get him through this season. Meanwhile, since he's gone down, Garver has been the Rangers' primary catcher. And, we know how that goes when Garver gets at bats and is able to avoid the IL himself. He generally produces. He has big power, hits the ball very hard. In his past 12 games now, after this 3-for-4 performance, Garver hitting .375 with 3 home runs, 3 doubles, average exit velocity 94 miles per hour. And so I think it's to the point now where in one catcher leagues, if you're dissatisfied with who you have behind the plate, I don't know, maybe like Elias Diaz is on the road, or whoever else. If you're dissatisfied with your catching option, I think you could potentially look into Garver now. Campusano, I can't say that yet because Gary Sanchez is still playing more often than him, but maybe that won't last. I mean, we have a lot of doubts about how good Gary Sanchez actually is. It seems like the home runs keep coming either way. But Campusano, I kind of have prospect fatigue with him. I'm not even sure he really counts as a prospect anymore because he's gotten scattered opportunities in the majors over the years. But it's taken so long, it continues to take so long for the Padres to give him regular playing time that it's easy to forget. Luis Campusano at AAA last year hit .298 with an .846 OPS. The year before hit .295 with a .906 OPS. The very fact he played back-to-back seasons at AAA tells you how much they've slow played this guy. But he's still only 24 and may have a future for them behind the plate. I just need to see the playing time increase before I recommend Campusano outside of deep 2-catcher leagues.
Yeah, so he's only started one of the past 3 games there, and the acquisitions of G-Man Choi and Garrett Cooper mean that Campusano and Sanchez are probably going to split catcher duties for the time being. Before those guys came, one of the catchers would play DH, the other one at catcher, so that was actually good for the playing time. But following these moves, we'll see what the playing time looks like for Luis Campusano. Let's take our first break, and when we return, what to do with Cody Bellinger long-term, keeper and dynasty leagues. I think it's really interesting conversation. We'll talk about it right after this.
CBS Sports Network goes all in with the World Series of Poker. We're talking a full house of characters in a competition flush with cash. The World Series of Poker on CBS Sports Network.
Welcome back, and a quick reminder to join our Fantasy Baseball Today Facebook group. Obviously, it's free. You can find the link, facebook.com/groups/Fantasy Baseball Today, or just search Fantasy Baseball Today on Facebook. You'll be able to find it, join up. You can ask your questions, interact with other fans of the show, some listeners, some people who hang out on YouTube, waiver wire questions, trades, dynasty, keeper, all that kind of fun stuff. Join our Facebook group and start asking your questions today. Speaking of keeper and dynasty leagues, Cody Bellinger, what do we do? He went 3 for 3 on Monday with 2 RBI. He is now batting .332 with 16 home runs, 17 steals, and a .935 OPS on the year. And that's with him missing some time. He had an IL stint in there. Last 30 games for Cody Bellinger. This guy is on fire. .430 batting average, 9 homers, 7 steals, and 1191 OPS. And he drastically has reduced the strikeout rate this year. What I keep coming back to, Scott, is the quality of contact and the expected numbers. They're so underwhelming, and I've brought up some theories about how he's changed his approach this year with 2 strikes, and he's just looking to put the ball in play, and that might kind of drag down his average exit velocity and some of those expected numbers. We haven't seen him perform like this since 2019 when he won the MVP. He's on a 1-year deal with the Chicago Cubs. He's 28 years old. I think is a fascinating conversation. What do we do with Cody Bellinger long-term in keeper and dynasty leagues? Your thoughts?
Well, I think it's important to remember. I mean, this season for Cody Bellinger is serving as a reminder that strikeout rate versus average exit velocity, which is more important? Well, ultimately, you'd rather make contact of any kind than no contact at all, because your chances of getting a hit on a contacted ball of any sort is infinitely higher than on a ball you don't make contact on. And Case in point was this 3-for-3 performance today where Cody Bellinger got 2 singles of less than 80 miles per hour. It's kind of been the story of his whole season. So that's one point to bring up. Second point I want to bring up. You mentioned his expected stats are underwhelming. They're not as underwhelming as they used to be.
They did get better. I noticed that too.
Yeah, 80th percentile now for expected batting average, 66th percentile for expected slug. His actual batting average and slug are still much higher than his expected stats, but the expected stats don't look bad on their own anymore for Cody Bellinger. So that's point number 2 I want to bring up. As for your broad question, what do we do with Cody Bellinger in dynasty leagues? I think if you can, cash in. That's what I think you should do. I mean, even if you buy completely that he's who he is right now, that he's earned everything he's done so far, and he's going to sustain this completely for the rest of the season. I have my doubts about that, but even if you buy that completely, his profile has been so volatile over the course of his career. He's run into so many mechanical issues that have put him in a deep hole that's taken years to come out of. That just why even mess with it anymore? And it'd be different if I sensed that nobody was really buying it. Okay, and enjoy it while it lasts, if that's the case. But what I've seen in my own dynasty leagues is people who have Cody Bellinger declaring him untouchable. You know, I've seen in multiple dynasty leagues, people send out a message saying, you know, you can ask about Cody Bellinger, but I consider him my whatever best keeper, and I'll need to be blown away to trade him. That's what I've seen. Now, maybe that's just gamesmanship. Maybe they're just trying to milk everything they can out of this performance, but I haven't actually seen him traded either in any of my dynasty leagues. So I do think there's this sense among people that Cody Bellinger is back. And maybe he is, but the whole point of selling high is that, you know, even if you guess wrong about a player's ability to sustain it, you've already gotten a proper return for him at his highest value. So it's really a no risk situation. I don't know exactly what a sell high offer looks like. That would be hard to sort out, especially, you know, given how different dynasty leagues can be with keeper costs. Just entire economies can vary so much from dynasty league to dynasty league. But I wouldn't just rest on my laurels with Cody Bellinger. I would try to shop him and avoid future headaches. And if it doesn't work out, fine, you still have Cody Bellinger.
Yeah, I think the question on what to try and get back in a dynasty league, it's pretty impossible to answer specifics. I mean, it'll come down to you're trying to sell Cody Bellinger to a team that's probably competing, or they need an outfielder or first baseman, whatever it might be. So you have to find a team that you line up with from a trade perspective, and then it's what do they have in return that you're looking for? Are you trying to flip them for a pitcher or a prospect? I did pull up your midseason top 50 fantasy baseball prospects, Scott, and maybe some things have changed since you published this list, but let's just say you did want to try and flip Cody Bellinger for a prospect. We'll throw it out there.
Okay.
What would you think is a fair return? Like, what would you be looking for if you had Bellinger on your team? Is it a top 25 prospect? Is that realistic? Is it like a top 50 guy, somewhere in like the 26 to 50 range? Like, what do you think might be a realistic return if you're selling Cody Bellinger?
Well, you're asking me to answer an impossible question because, again, it varies so much depending on the specific setup of your dynasty league. There are some that I'm sure you could sell Bellinger for like a top 5 prospect, for like a Jackson Chorio or a Jackson Holiday, potentially. I mean, if you're selling him to a contender and there aren't many prospects kept per team, I think that's something you could try. If it's a deeper dynasty league that goes deeper into the prospect pool and values prospects similarly to the way major league teams do, where they're much, much cheaper to keep than full-fledged major leaguers are, then I still think you got to look at I don't know, the top dozen or so. I mean, you get to 13th in my midseason prospect rankings. It's Colson Montgomery. You get Drew Jones at 15, Harry Ford at 16. I mean, these are not, I don't know. I think you might need a prospect package for Bellinger if that's the route you're planning to go. I mean, I know in our 2014 Dynasty League that I set up, where minor leaguers are free to keep and major leaguers salary escalates pretty quickly from year to year, prospects carry a lot more value in that format. But I don't think the average Dynasty League is set up that way.
Yeah. I was looking right around the top 20 range. Maybe I'm selling Bellinger a little bit short, but like Pete Crow Armstrong, Heston Kierstad, and Colt Keith, you have 18 through 20. Yeah. Those are all pretty interesting, offensive prospects, right? From like a hitting perspective, long-term, they look like pretty interesting players. So,
well, okay. But let's consider this also, because if you have Bellinger, there's a very good chance you got him for very cheap this year. And if you do play in the sort of dynasty leagues where players are kept at disparate values, then Bellinger himself is probably a high value keeper. And he's only 28. So if the theory is he's turned his career around and has years like this ahead of him, I would be very careful about selling him short. Okay. I do think it's worth selling him if you can get a monster return for him. But I don't know, like from a redraft perspective, where do you see Cody Bellinger going next year? I mean, it kind of depends, obviously, how the next 2 months go. But as things stand right now, round 4, round 5, something like that.
I was going to say top 60 player. So in a 12-team league, it's a top 5 round pick. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, that gives you an idea of what you should be looking to get for him. And if it is the sort of league where you keep him for much cheaper than round 4, round 5 value, then that's all the more you should expect in return.
Yeah. And it's an interesting point that you bring up about if you keep a player based on where you got them in the draft or your salary cap draft, whatever it might be. I'm looking at my home league, for example. We keep 4 players. They move up 1 round in value each year. Cody Bellinger was drafted in round 19. He's a round 18 keeper next year. Like that,
yep.
That's a really, really good keeper. So just to, again, kind of put that in perspective, we can't really talk about it from like a blanket perspective because, again, like so many keeper and dynasty leagues are so different. But that's a really good point on Cody Bellinger there. And just a really, really interesting player heading into this offseason. I mentioned he's on a 1-year deal with the Cubs. It's actually a mutual option for 2024, but
as mutual options ever get exercised?
No, it's probably,
I mean, unless you're like best friends with the GM or something.
Yeah. So interesting player there in Cody Bellinger. I know this happened over the weekend, Scott, but Chris Towers texted me. He's like, oh crap, I forgot to talk about Max Fried and Brandon Woodruff. So I was like, all right, there wasn't really much going on here on Monday. So let's talk about that. We had some pitcher returns. Max Fried, a great return on Friday at the Cubs. He went 6 shutout innings with 8 strikeouts. And, it's a small sample this year, but he's got a 1.69 ERA and a .97 whip. He obviously has arguably the best run support in baseball with the Atlanta Braves. Brandon Woodruff looked pretty good in his return on Sunday as well, facing the Pirates. He allowed 2 runs over 5 innings with 9 strikeouts to 0 walks, 16 swinging strikes on 85 pitches. Velocity mostly looked fine for him. Again, it's a really small sample for Woodruff, but when he's pitched, he's looked really good. Tons of swinging strikes, lots of strikeouts here. Scott, do you think Max Fried and Brandon Woodruff should be valued as top 24, top 20 starting pitchers rest of season?
They immediately are they transcend the glob. They are among the couple dozen pitchers who do. You couldn't ask for a better return from either of them. And it's obviously the lineups have already locked for this week, but I would have no hesitation about putting either of them back in my lineup.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at the rankings now. And so I previously moved Tyler Glasnow inside of my top 12, and now he's, dealing with injury. But man, I think the back end of that top 12, you can make an argument right there, right? It's like Max Fried and Brandon Woodruff. We've seen these guys be really good in the past. And, then you get into names like Logan Webb and Max Scherzer and Aaron Nola. Webb has been fine, but, Scherzer and Nola, they've been,
Yeah,
kinda
I
inconsistent.
have more trust in Woodruff and Fried at this point than either of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of returns, by the way, Yuri Perez did make his return to the Marlins on Monday. Didn't look too great. 4 2/3 innings, 4 runs allowed, 7 strikeouts, 2 home runs allowed. Did get a ton of whiffs in this one, 16 swinging strikes on 78 pitches, but gave up a decent amount of hard contact. Velocity looked fine for Yuri Perez. I don't know that there's too much to take away here, Scott. It's his first start back in the majors after a while. So maybe just shaking off a little bit of rust. What'd you see from Yuri Perez?
Yeah, I mean, considering he lined up for 2 starts right away, and so I recommended everybody starting him. It's disappointing in that sense. He didn't deliver a good outcome, but in the more in the ways that are more predictive, the ways that measure skill level more, Yuri Perez looked great. He had a lot of whiffs, he had a lot of strikeouts. He the velocity was actually up a little from when we saw him before. And I was surprised that he came within and out of going 5 innings. I figured after throwing just 45 and 63 pitches in his 2 warm-up appearances in the minors, Perez might be cut off right at 4 innings. Well, he wasn't getting great results, and he still went almost 5. So that gives me hope that the Marlins aren't going to baby him too much down the stretch. Now, they haven't been winning many games since the All-Star break, so they could quickly fall out of the race here, and maybe they consider shutting Yuri Perez down then and there. But he appears to have some runway for the time being, and while I would be shocked if he went beyond 6 innings in any one start the rest of the way, this one gives me some hope that he might go 6 innings every now and then.
Yeah, but I think, on a per inning basis, if Yuri Perez is giving you 5 or 6 innings consistently, he's probably still going to be really, really good during that time. We'll see. The Marlins are a half a game out of the wild card spot right now and 3-7 in their last 10 games. So definitely need Yuri Perez to come through for them. And speaking of that start, we actually had some rookie on rookie crime here, Scott. Christian Encarnacion Strand went 1 for 3 with his second home run, and it came off of Yuri Perez, 107.4 exit velocity for CES, and actually went back-to-back with Joey Votto in that game against the Marlins. Let's hit some news and notes. Josh Jung was placed on the IL and will have surgery to stabilize his fractured left thumb. Obviously, a very big loss from this past weekend. He's expected to miss the next 6 weeks, and Bruce Bochy did say the expectation is that Jung will play again this season. But, we're probably looking at the 2nd or 3rd week of September, so not really going to be much time left at that point. Shane Bieber was cleared to begin a throwing program on Wednesday. He is reportedly pain-free following right elbow inflammation, but that's another one where if he's just starting a throwing program now, maybe mid-September, 3rd week of September, something like that. So not too much time left here for Shane Bieber. Tristan McKenzie was able to play catch on 5 consecutive days without issue, a good sign as he continues his recovery from a right UCL sprain. Remains hopeful to pitch again this season, but also remains without a timetable. That is Tristan McKenzie. Carlos Rodon was placed on the IL with a left hamstring strain. The Yankees did not announce a timeline, and obviously it's been a very disappointing first season, riddled with injury. We had the back injury, we had the forearm injury, and on top of that, poor performance when he has been healthy. So not a great first year here for Carlos Rodon. Trevor Story will make his season debut Tuesday against the Royals, and in 13 games on his rehab assignment, he hit 300 with 4 home runs, 1 steal, and an 1117 OPS. So a potential difference maker here coming with Trevor Story. Same thing could be said for Chris Sale, likely to be activated to start Friday against the Tigers, and he threw 53 pitches in his last rehab outing. Maybe he gets up to 70, 75 pitches. But Scott, let's say you play in a daily lineup league. Would you throw Chris Sale out there against the Tigers this Friday?
I mean, the fact it's against the Tigers, yeah, I think you have to do that in a daily lineup league. If it was a tougher matchup, maybe I'd play it safe, but that one's too favorable. Mm-hmm. And he looked good on his rehab assignment. I think velocity was down a little bit, but that's always kind of all over the place for Sale anyway.
Clayton Kershaw is, quote, very likely to return Thursday against the Rockies. He's been out since July 3rd with left shoulder inflammation. And I assume it's the same thing there, Scott. If Daily lineup league, Kershaw against the Rockies. I think we throw him out there, right?
Yeah, obviously daily lineup leagues are you're incentivized to get as many starts as you can. So I think I told people to play it safe in weekly lineup leagues, sit Kershaw for his first start back, but daily lineup leagues, different animal, again, favorable matchup. He did not have a rehab assignment, which is a little worrisome. He just threw sim games, but I imagine Kershaw will probably be fine in this start.
Starling Marte was placed on the IL with a right groin strain and a brutal season for a 34-year-old coming off of groin surgery. And, I probably should have saw this one coming. I was optimistic about Starling Marte. Scott, you were not, and you nailed that one on Starling Marte this year. Suspensions were handed out for Saturday's brawl between the White Sox and the Guardians. Did you guys talk about that yesterday, by the way, Scott?
Of course.
It was amazing. Oh, I mean, I don't know. We don't condone violence here on the podcast, but pretty entertaining stuff between Tim Anderson and Jose Ramirez. Anderson suspended 6 games, Ramirez 3 games, Emmanuel Clase got 1 game, and each of the managers, Pedro Grifol and Terry Francona, each suspended 1 game. Anderson and Ramirez will both appeal.
Did you ever hear what they were upset about? Like why? Because it was just it seemed like a ordinary play.
Yeah, I saw a few different things. I saw someone say that Jose Ramirez didn't like the tag. I think maybe he got hit in the face. But then I also heard on one of the broadcasts tonight that I think Tim Anderson was chirping at some of the Guardians rookies and I don't know, said some kind of messed up stuff to them. So there's probably a few different stories out there.
It's interesting. Anderson got twice as long as a suspension from Jose Ramirez. Cause I was trying to watch the video, slow it down to see if I could figure out who exactly instigated. It looked to me like Jose Ramirez was asking for help up after he was tagged. And I don't know what words were exchanged, but it kind of escalated from there. Tim Anderson wasn't helping him up. And I was trying to see who actually squared up first. And it was pretty simultaneous, but it did look like Tim Anderson did a shade earlier.
Right.
So I guess he was deemed to be more of the instigator than Ramirez was.
Yeah, I'm watching it back now, and Tim Anderson, he did kind of push Jose Ramirez first. He was the first one to kind of start that, and then definitely he squared up like a split second earlier than Jose Ramirez. But wow, crazy fight there this past weekend between the Guardians and the White Sox. Tim Anderson, by the way, was removed Monday due to a bruised left forearm he suffered on a hit by pitch. Marcus Stroman will throw a bullpen session on Tuesday. The Cubs are hoping he will return when first eligible on August 16th. Jazz Chisholm underwent an MRI that revealed no structural damage to his right hamstring. He did not start on Monday, but he did hit a pinch hit home run. Walker Buehler will face hitters this week, and it was reported last week that he was close to beginning a rehab assignment, could potentially make an impact in September. Walker Buehler, 57% rostered, and somebody that you should be stashing right now. Royce Lewis will begin a rehab assignment Tuesday with AAA, and he's been out since July 1st with a left oblique strain. He's 47% rostered. Scott, I am not sure where Royce Lewis is going to play when he returns to the Twins. I mean, Edouard Julien has hit pretty well over the past month. They still have Correa. They have Jorge Polanco, who's now playing third base. I don't know.
Well, Jorge Polanco is playing third base sometimes. Actually, not as often as Willie Castro and Kyle Farmer are playing third base. Polanco's been kind of bouncing around, and I don't think Julian's coming out. I think they're sold on Julian, at least against right-handed pitchers. I noticed he actually got a start against the left-hander recently, too. I wonder if it might be Polanco. Not to say Polanco will never play again, but if he might just kind of fade into a super utility role here and spell everybody as necessary.
I know Royce Lewis has played the outfield in the past, but I don't think they want him to play the outfield, right?
Right. That's where he tore the ACL the second time. So I doubt that.
Yeah, I doubt it as well. So I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. Technically it's a good problem for the Twins to have, but Royce Lewis could be back soon. Brett Beatty was optioned back to AAA, which means Mark Vientos will likely get a look as an everyday player here for the Mets. Brett Beatty, 23 years old, still pretty small sample size in his career, 353 plate appearances, but has not performed very well, Scott. I guess this is more of a philosophical question, and it might depend on the player, right? It's like, what are their flaws? What specific flaws does each young player have? But how much do you need to see before you start losing a lot of faith in a player from a dynasty perspective, like a Brett Beatty? How much more do you need to see before, you actually start to sour on that player?
I need to see more, especially knowing the quality of contact that he makes. And, at times, overall, the plate discipline has been solid. So I think there's still a lot to like there with Brett Beatty. It's not even a full season's worth of at-bats that he's accumulated between this year and last year. We've only started to see signs of Spencer Torkelson turning it around. Even that's I would say the jury's still out on him, because it's been more like bursts of production than steady production. It's been steady production from Tristan Casas, but it only took until his third month in the majors to get there. So I guess I'm kind of talking around the question, and I don't really know. I'm just providing different examples of times where patience has paid off. You could say the same to a certain degree for Bobby Witt and Julio Rodriguez last year, for Gunnar Henderson to a degree. We have talked a lot over the past few years about how it seems like even the highest end prospects are taking longer to really find their footing in the majors. And it's been a difficult adjustment, because we kind of got used to, you stash this prospect who's killing it at AAA, and as soon as he gets called up, you're going to have a stud. And it's rarely played out that way the past few years. But if you're talking from a dynasty perspective, I've already sunk years into this guy. How long before I consider selling him for nickels on the dollar? I can't give you a 100% blanket answer. Maybe at least a year, maybe at least a full season's worth of at-bats before you start thinking about it, which Torkelson is there now, but Beatty obviously is not.
But the point is, specifically on Beatty, you need to see more, and I think that makes sense for him. Let's take our final break, and when we return, we'll get into the leftovers. What else happened here on Monday? We'll talk about that right after this.
And how about this?
Get ready for non-stop action that will have you say,
You gotta be kidding.
"Oh my, Canada."
This could change things. What a play and what a finish.
That's some pretty good football, eh?
He's gone all the way to the house.
It's the Canadian Football League, Thursday on CBS Sports Network.
Welcome back, and we did mention earlier that some pitchers got rocked here on Monday. Spencer Strider, what happened, man? He got hit hard by the Pirates of all teams. He only lasted 2 2/3 innings. He gave up 5 runs, 3 walks, 3 strikeouts. I saw some quotes after the game. Strider said, he gave credit to the Pirates. He said they were fouling off a lot of pitches, and I kind of hurt myself with all the walks here. Kind of just held himself accountable, and just a rough outing here. It just stinks that it came against the Pirates of all teams. And then in a shootout here between the Dodgers and Padres, Seth Lugo and Tony Gonsolin both crushed against each other. Lugo lasts only 3 1/3 innings. I was watching to start the first 3 innings. He looked perfectly fine. I walked away. I think I went to go get some lunch or something. I came back. He gave up 8 runs. Like, what happens to Seth Lugo? So he gave up the 8 runs here. His ERA jumps up to 4.19. And Tony Gonsolin, we spoke about him recently, Scott. It's been a rough year. 6 runs allowed over 6 innings pitched. He's up to a 4.42 ERA and a 1.19 whip. Anything actionable on these players? Strider, Lugo, Gonsolin. Maybe we're dropping Gonsolin. He's still 92% rostered.
Yeah, I think he's over rostered, Gonsolin. Even when he's pitched well, which hasn't been very often, he hasn't gone 6 innings. This was just his second 6-inning start in his last 9. And obviously it wasn't very good. So I think I think we're fine letting him go. Seth Lugo was a letdown. Obviously, he was much higher than Cole Ragans, for instance, on my sleeper pitchers list for this week. Was a tough matchup, and so maybe we give him a pass for that. Really, it seemed like his curveball wasn't quite right, and that's the key to everything for Seth Lugo. It's a pitch with a lot of movement. It gets he tends to throw it a lot. It has a nice whiff rate given how much he throws it. He got 0 whiffs on 19 curveballs in this start, so he wasn't throwing it as much, and it didn't seem to be effective at all. An isolated start like this, it's not anything to worry about, but if it becomes a pattern, then we might be off of Seth Lugo just as quickly as we were on him. Strider, it's kind of a similar story. His fastball did not seem to be up to capacity. It's not like the velocity was down that much, or I think he was getting more drop on the fastball, just a little. Normally Seth Strider has that like textbook rising fastball that hitters swing under, and that's why it's been such a effective pitch for him more than just pure velocity. And he only got 1 whiff on 31 fastballs in this start against the Pirates lineup. So that's, I think, the clearest indication that it wasn't quite right. Was it just an isolated incident for him? Probably, but he's basically right at his career high in innings now. So could some fatigue be setting in here for Strider? I wouldn't rule it out. I just, obviously you're talking about a top 3 starting pitcher in fantasy by most people's rankings. So you don't want to overreact to one bad start, even against the Pirates. I do have to point out with him also, though, his ERA hasn't been lower than 3.44 since early June. So it's at 3.94 after this start. It hasn't been lower than 3.44 since early June. So, over 2 months of an ERA in the mid to high 3s, even low 4s at times for Spencer Strider. So he's had these starts where things just go wrong for him. He might be one of those pitchers where it doesn't take his fastball being off that much for it to go from being completely unhittable to pretty hittable, which is why we've kind of been hoping he'd develop a third pitch, a changeup at some point. He's flashed it at times this year, but seems reluctant to stick with it.
All right, let's slide over to a few other pitching leftovers. 4 names here that actually pitched pretty well. Pablo Lopez at the Tigers. He went 7 shutout innings with 8 strikeouts, 17 swinging strikes on 96 pitches for him. Brian Bayo has struggled a little bit recently, but bounced back with a quality start up against the Royals. He went 6 2/3 innings with 1 run allowed. Dylan Cease walked 7, somehow did not allow a run against the Yankees. He only allowed 1 hit in this one with 6 strikeouts over 5 1/3. And Kodai Senga bounced back with a quality start up against the Cubs. His velocity was down in his last outing, and it was back up. It seemed like it was fine, pretty much in line with the rest of the season. Scott, any thoughts on Kodai Senga, Dylan Cease, Brian Bayo, and Pablo Lopez?
Pablo Lopez transcends the blob at this point. I'm sorry, the glob. What's a blob? The glob. He is not a globby pitcher anymore. He is just somebody you start all the time and expect good results from. And that's what the underlying numbers said he was all along. But he had some rough stretches earlier this year that inflated his ERA. Not so much recently. I think you can totally trust in Pablo Lopez going forward. I think Kodai Senga is verging on that. Just the fact that he was, kind of bad in his previous start would suggest Kodai Senga is still globby. But there's been a pretty clear turning point for him, really coinciding with his walk rate. In his first 12 starts, 5.6 walks per 9. In his last 9 starts, 2.9 walks per 9. So it went from 5.6 to 2.9. That's a big turnaround for Kodai Senga. He's been much more consistent, apart from the occasional misfire like we saw in his previous outing. So I have a lot of trust in him. Brian Bayo, he's had some rough outings recently, but they haven't been like total blowout outings. He's done a good job of limiting damage, and that's what that heavy ground ball profile tends to do. And yeah, Dylan Cease, a very weird stat line with the 7 walks and only 1 hit. I don't know what more to say about Dylan Cease. I guess he's more Blake Snell than not at this point, right? Like he has the same headache and quality.
I think he's a lot worse than Blake Snell. I mean, obviously based on like the ERA, but He's
Well,
he's been
yeah. I mean, do you think Blake Snell is as good as his ERA? That's part of.
Yeah, that it is a good question. I think I recently moved Dylan Cease down behind Blake Snell because
That's reasonable.
yeah,
But I'm saying in terms of you're just as likely to get 5 walks from him as you are to get 9 strikeouts or whatever. However you want to phrase it. Just like the walks are so high that you never feel totally comfortable with him, even knowing he has great stuff and can get a lot of strikeouts for you.
Dylan Cease back into the glob you go. Some hitting leftovers here. 3 names. Mookie Betts went 1 for 5 with a grand slam. That's back-to-back games with a homer for him. He also has 4 home runs in his past 7 games. 31 home runs so far this year for Mookie Betts. A great season. William Contreras went 3 for 5 with a double and 3 RBI. And since the start of July, his last 30 games, William Contreras batting .349 with 3 home runs and a .913 OPS. He's hitting the ball hard, but you see that number, 3 home runs during the stretch. Too many ground balls. 54% ground ball rate for William Contreras during that span.
He's the better Contreras brother at this point, though, as far as I'm concerned. I've moved William ahead of Wilson.
I still have them back to back. I know the quality of contact this year has been really, really good for Contreras, for Wilson Contreras, but
both of them,
the results haven't been there for Wilson. So it's kind of weird. Just overall, I guess a weird year for the Cardinals and the way that everything kind of got started with Wilson Contreras, just odd season. Carlos Correa, he went 2 for 3 with his 13th home run. He added 4 RBI. What has happened this year, Scott? I mean, a 224 batting average, a 690 OPS. This comes, 1 year after he actually performed pretty well with the Minnesota Twins. And, we thought he would bounce back this year and be a value based on where he was going in drafts. And that has not happened. What have you seen here, Scotty?
I mean, yeah, especially considering the guy was offered like $1 billion worth in contracts this offseason between the Giants, Mets, and finally the Twins. And I don't really think that's obviously the reason that happened is because the first 2 teams backed out because of what showed up on the physical. But I don't really think that's related. It was a long-standing health issue that he had. And it would be weird that it would just suddenly manifest this year after a bunch of attention was drawn to it. I don't really know what happened to Carlos Correa. So I guess if you want to theorize what I just rejected, I can't really stop you. It's been a long time since I've hoped for the turnaround from him, since I really thought that was going to happen. I mean, even this game, as good as it was, him hitting a 3-run homer, that 3-run homer for Carlos Correa had an expected batting average of .040. It was not hit very hard.
Oh, geez.
Which, his max exit velocities are still good. He's still capable of hitting the ball hard. It's just, I don't know. It's last year with the Twins was pretty disappointing for him, and it's been even worse this year.
Yeah, it just looks like everything on the fringe has kind of gotten a little bit worse for Carlos Correa. The strikeout rate is slightly up. The ground balls are slightly up. His barrel rate slightly down this year. Expected numbers not good. He's also been day-to-day 4 different times this year with various injuries, back, heel, plantar fasciitis. So it wouldn't surprise me if perhaps those things have been affecting Carlos Correa this season. A few bullpen updates here for the Reds. Alexis Diaz walked 2, but picked up his 33rd save. For the Blue Jays, Eric Swanson entered in the 7th inning with the game tied 0-0, facing the heart of the Guardians lineup. So perhaps he's mostly high leverage at this point. Jordan Hicks eventually got the 9th inning with a two-run lead. Excuse me. He allowed 3 base runners, but did escape with his 10th save. And Hicks now has 2 of 3 saves since Jordan Romano went down with injury. Do you think that's how it's going to play out, I guess, for the, short-term future here, Scotty?
I think it's 2 of 4 saves, right? 2 for Hicks, 2 for Swanson.
So the first save that Swanson got, that was before they acquired Jordan Hicks. So I guess it was Romano went down, but they didn't have Hicks yet.
I know there was one game where Hicks set up for Swanson. So I don't know. I mean, Romano's not going to be out long enough that it probably is worth sorting out if they're going to go back and forth between those two. I think Swanson's a better pitcher than Hicks, although he hasn't been very good lately. So I don't know. I mean, you could go with either one in the hope of getting saves. Maybe I lean Hicks now just because he got the last one with Swanson working the sevens, but it wouldn't surprise me if they changed it up tomorrow.
Yeah, I think if you play in a deeper league, 15-team league, and you're probably desperate for saves, I would imagine, in leagues that deep. I know I have been. I'm starting Eric Swanson in a league that deep, so I think you probably could get away with starting Swanson and Jordan Hicks in those deeper leagues for now. For the Royals, Carlos Hernandez got the 9th inning with the game tied. He gave up a walk-off grand slam. And to be fair, I was watching this game. Luis Arias had a check swing with 2 strikes. He very clearly went around. The umpire did not rule it that way. And the next hitter hit a grand slam, walk-off grand slam there against Carlos Hernandez. So no bueno. For the White Sox, Gregory Santos is on the bereavement list. Brian Shaw pitched the final 2 innings for his first save of the season. For the Mets, I thought this was just kind of interesting, Scott, that Brooks Raley, with a 5-run lead, he entered in the 7th inning, and he recorded the next 5 outs. So I don't know if that's telling moving forward, but I don't know. It's a little weird.
Yeah, it may be more of a committee than it seemed at first.
Yeah, I would imagine Adam Ottavino, if anybody's, could be the other name there, getting saves for the Mets.
Since he didn't get traded, yeah.
For the Angels, Carlos Estevez has been struggling big time. Entered in the 9th inning with a 1-run lead. He gave up 5 runs on 3 hits and 2 walks. He's now given up 4+ runs in 2 of his last 3 outings. And I don't know, Scott, let's say, something does happen here and someone else gets an opportunity. Who would it be for the Angels? Is it Ronaldo Lopez?
It might be. I know a lot of people were speculating at the time Lopez was acquired that maybe he could threaten Carlos Estevez's job. It didn't really make sense to me then because Estevez had a sub-2 ERA, but now his ERA is up to 3.57. His whip's up to 150.
Yeah.
And Lopez, meanwhile, I know he was bad in the role for the White Sox earlier this year, but he, in his past 12 appearances, has a 0.64 ERA, 107 whip, 13.5 K per 9. If I was looking to add anyone as Estevez insurance, it would be Lopez.
All right. And for the Rangers, Will Smith picked up his 21st save, and he just kind of looks like the guy again. I think Chapman got 1 save after the All-Star break, and Will Smith has the other 5 or 6 during that time. So Will Smith, once again, getting the saves. Let's wrap up with to stream or not to stream. And on Tuesday, we have actually, I would say, a pretty decent group of pitchers here, Scott. Cutter Crawford going up against the Royals, I think, is pretty good. I think Ranger Suarez against the Nationals is fine. And I don't know. I'm like kind of in between. I think Josiah Gray at the Phillies or Wade Miley versus the Rockies in Milwaukee. I think those are both fine. Maybe even Clark Schmidt at the White Sox.
Yeah, those all sound like good options to me. My favorite 2 are Cutter Crawford against the Royals and Ranger Suarez against the Nationals. If you want a random number generator, Miles Michaelis at the Rays.
Yeah.
He might go 7 shutout innings. He might go 3 7-run innings.
Yeah. Brady Singer has pitched well, but at the Red Sox, I don't think I want to do it.
Neither do I.
Yeah. Same thing with Brendan Pfaadt. His last start was really good, but against the Dodgers, no way. So
nope.
It's a start to watch. And let's, if Pfaadt pitches well there, then, we might be talking about him as a waiver wire ad again, but not tomorrow. Don't start him tomorrow. On Wednesday or Tuesday, today when you're listening to this. On Wednesday, we have, I think, Graham Ashcraft versus the Marlins.
Ugh.
Maybe?
Ugh.
He's pitched well, Scott. No?
He has, in a way that's hard to make sense of because the strikeouts are so low, the walks are so high.
True.
I would prefer Brian Wu against the Padres.
Okay. Brian Wu, Kyle Hendricks at the Mets, maybe?
Maybe.
He got rocked his last time out, but it was against the Braves, so it's, obviously a super tough matchup. I think the Mets are a little bit better there. So, I think Brian Wu at the top of the list. followed by Kyle Hendricks and Graham Ashcraft for me. Anything here on like Adrian Hauser versus the Rockies, Logan
No.
Allen versus the Blue Jays, Mike Clevenger versus the Yankees?
No, I wouldn't do any of those.
All right. Well, I did have Team Name Tuesday lined up here. And I actually think we got some pretty good team names here, but we're already running a little bit long. I'll save it for tomorrow. Chris will be on the podcast, and obviously he'll know all these pop references, and it'll be a lot better. So we'll wait for Chris tomorrow. We are going to wrap there. For Scott, I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, and we will be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.